Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're starting the final season of Telltale Games' The Walking Dead. In case you missed any of the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Season 4 of Telltale Games' The Walking Dead was called The Final Season, and the first episode, titled Done Running, released on August 14th, 2018, gaining mostly positive reviews. The season itself puts us back in the shoes of Clementine, several years after the events of A New Frontier, and after she's reunited with AJ. This season only has 4 episodes, and like the previous 3 seasons, we'll be breaking them down and examining the major choices and conundrums that the game presents. We won't be examining every possible angle, but we'll be looking at how the story goes if we follow it from the most ethical position we can. The opening of the episode finds us riding along in a car as Clementine drives and AJ plays with an empty revolver in the back seat. Both of them are much older than when we last saw them, and it's clear that Clem has been teaching AJ survival skills. From the conversation, we find out they haven't eaten much in a while, and an attempt at distracting AJ by having him read turns out to be a bad idea, as the only book available is apparently a cookbook. Before long, they come to an old, abandoned-looking building surrounded by overturned train cars and various railings and junk. It appears someone had used the place as a home at some point, and we see a bell with a sign telling anyone who may be friendly to ring it. Ringing the bell awakens a zombie that was passed out closer to the actual building, and after taking that zombie out and breaking into the train station, Clem and AJ discover the former occupants of the place tied to a pair of chairs living their best zombie life. The couple apparently decided to end their own lives after tying themselves up and leaving a note to let anyone who found them know that they wanted to be left zombified together forever. They also apparently locked up the back room to the building and made sure the key was tied to one of their belts so that anyone who might be interested in scavenging would need to either find another way in or risk a bite or a scratch. Now, under normal circumstances, the right thing to do is to respect the wishes of the deceased. If they want to be buried, cremated, hung from a rock to warn others of the consequences of piracy, their final wishes are their own and we should do our best to carry them out. That being said, in this specific instance, we need to focus on our own survival first and foremost. We don't know what supplies might exist in the back room, and the only 2 ways to get in there are to kill the zombies or to shove AJ through an opening in the gate where they used to issue tickets. Now, shoving AJ through the hole just seems like a bad idea on the surface, but it becomes even worse when we think back to the 4th episode of Season 2, when Clem climbed through a similar opening to try to open a door for Bonnie and Mike. That memory, if nothing else, would prevent Clementine from making the same mistake as she nearly died when a zombie they didn't see hiding sprung up. Dispatching the zombies and getting into the room, they find some ammo for AJ's gun and a trap door that leads to a cache of food hidden under the floor. But the stash was booby-trapped, and Clem and AJ are barely able to get out of the room in time before it explodes. As a side note, we can assume the zombies we killed to get the key were the ones who set up the booby trap, and the fact that they would do something like that just wipes away any guilt that might exist for not leaving them in the state they requested. While Clem and AJ are relatively unharmed, the sound of the explosion brings in a horde of zombies that had apparently been hiding in the woods, and they have to fight to escape the building. But getting back to the car isn't much better, as the horde surrounds them, and Clementine winds up crashing before they get very far. But it turns out the zombies weren't the only thing lurking in the woods. As Clementine passes out from her injuries after the accident, she sees arrows taking out zombies, and someone pulls AJ from the wreckage. Sometime later, Clem finds herself waking up in an unfamiliar room, with one of her arms being taped to the post of a bed that she's lying in. She manages to get free pretty easily, and after exploring the room a bit, she heads out into the hallway to try to figure out where she's been taken. It doesn't take long, however, to run into someone, as she hides from a figure that turns out to be a little boy. But he isn't alone, as an older boy joins the party, telling Clementine that his name is Marlon. It turns out the place is an old boarding school, run completely by kids, and Marlon is in charge, or at least he seems to be. They seem to be pretty well established, with hunting parties and a hierarchy that most adult-run groups we've seen in the series would love to have. It looks like a sort of paradise, but if there's one thing that we know about the Walking Dead universe, things are not always what they seem. Clementine is reunited with AJ, meeting a few older kids along the way, before heading outside the wall to assist with killing zombies, so that one of the hunting parties can get back inside without being eaten. As we clear the area, we find out the group has also set up a ton of traps, and we get the chance to use them all as we take out the dead. As they finish up, we find a couple of points to really hone in on here. The first revolves around one member of the hunting party arguing with Marlon about the need to scout further out for food, as they are having trouble finding enough food to feed everyone. Marlon brushes this off, telling him that they'll discuss it later, but it's a point that the entire episode winds up hinging on. We don't know exactly how long they've been in this place, or much about them in general for that matter, but we can infer from this brief conversation that there are some problems with the inner workings of the group. Secondly, as the group is coming back inside the walls, Marlon winds up taking an elbow to his groin when he walks up on AJ unexpectedly. This is the second time the boy has physically harmed someone, having bitten a girl named Ruby on the hand earlier, and it's starting to look like a pattern with him overreacting to things. Now, the situation with hitting Marlon could be due to his anxiety from always being on the lookout for zombies, as Marlon kind of walked up behind him without warning. But the situation with Ruby points to self-control issues. He is only a kid, and he doesn't have a lot of experience with people in general, but it's still something interesting to note for future reference. AJ has the chance to apologize for these outbursts, and he does seem genuinely sorry for them. The group is willing to forgive him, and before long they're all sharing a meal before Marlon, Lewis, and Brody invite Clem to play a game of cards as they all get to know each other a bit better. After all of that, Clem and AJ head off to bed, but AJ isn't tired yet and wants to spend some time drawing before going to sleep. This desire is partially driven by a box of art supplies pulled down earlier by Clem as she was exploring the room, and it turns out the box actually belongs to a boy named 10. Violet comes in to retrieve them, and this is the first time we really have a decision to make with regard to AJ and sharing. You can choose to give the box back or tell him it's okay to keep it. Violet doesn't seem overly concerned with it, but urging him to give it back is the right thing to do. He seems a little disappointed, but he's willing to give it back after finishing the drawing that he is working on. And as he's drawing, we learn a little bit more about the group as Violet opens up to Clementine. It turns out the room that Clem and AJ are now in once belonged to a pair of girls known as Sophie and Minerva, who had it decorated with paintings that Sophie would make using the art supplies. About a year prior to Clementine's arrival, the twin sisters had been out scavenging with Marlon and Brody, and they wound up being killed by zombies out past the safe zone. The next morning, Clem and AJ make their way to Marlon's office, meeting 10 and giving us the second chance to teach AJ about sharing. These little moments where we can help instill values in AJ are actually kind of nice, and really bring a level of realism to the characters that has been really hit or miss since Season 1. He's young enough to need a lot of guidance, and his lack of experience with people other than Clem gives us a lot of room to have a similar impact on him that Lee had on Clementine. We also get the chance to get to know the community dog, Rosie, as she comes in just ahead of Marlon to give Clem a scare. The only other dog we've seen Clementine come into contact with was Sam in Season 2, Episode 1, and that didn't turn out well for either of them, so it's understandable that she would be hesitant to be around Rosie. That aside, Marlon offers Clem and AJ the chance to join the community and asks the pair to assist with either fishing alongside Violet and Brody or hunting with Lewis and Asim. We also learn a little bit more about the general area, with Marlon mentioning the greenhouse is overgrown and unusable, and telling Clem to stay inside the safe zone because anytime anyone goes outside of it,
bad shit happens. People die or disappear.
It's hard to trust anyone at this point, but Marlon does seem to be at least sincere in his desire to keep the kids safe, and he asks Clementine to help him with that before she finally heads out to help Louis and Asim. Louis seems to be a bit of a jokester, not really taking anything serious, and Asim is more down to earth, leading to a bit of friction when they're out trying to catch food. Despite the tense situation, the group is able to catch a rabbit before we're presented with a choice when they find a baby rabbit in one of their snares. Louis suggests killing it as they need the food, but Asim points out that it isn't big enough and should be allowed to grow up before being eaten. While this isn't necessarily an ethical choice, Asim does have a good point that not leaving the babies to grow up will hurt the group in the future, as the number of animals to hunt will drop to 0. There has to be some control and purpose to the choices when it comes to hunting their food if they want to survive in the long term. As Asim heads back with the lone rabbit they were able to catch, Louis leads Clem and AJ to the fishing shack to check on the progress that Violet and Brody have made. It turns out they really haven't been able to get anything, as someone has not only raided the traps they laid out to catch fish, but also stolen the supplies from the shack. It's a big blow to the community, but as Brody leaves to update Marlon on the situation, Clementine suggests a spot where they might be able to find food. The train station she and AJ found that is just outside the safe zone. Though Violet and Louis are both a bit hesitant, the group eventually makes their way to the building, using Louis as a distraction to make their way around the herd of zombies still roaming the area. Once inside, Clem and AJ find that while some of the food was destroyed in the earlier blast, there is still a decent amount left. But it doesn't come without some trouble, as a man surprises Clem and threatens to shoot her if she doesn't give him the food. Before he can get too much though, AJ pops out of the hole and threatens the man at gunpoint, telling him not to steal from them. And this is where things kind of start going downhill. For one thing, the man tries to assert that he's not stealing because the supplies don't belong to Clem and AJ either. While it could be argued that he is right as they only recently found the stash, they are technically in possession of it and could easily claim ownership at this point. What he's doing is robbing a couple of kids, which he probably sees as easy marks. Now, he does seem to be willing to just leave given the circumstances, but honestly, the rules of engagement are a lot different now than they were years ago when the outbreak started, and we can't just let him walk away. He could follow us back, and he really doesn't seem like someone that we should be trusting. It's one of those moments where you kind of need to go with your gut feeling. And I need to make a quick note here because unlike the first 3 seasons, I've not played this season and have managed to mostly avoid spoilers overall. This one might be the easiest to cover in this series because of that, with my choices following along a blind ethical line instead of risking any kind of skew due to knowledge of what is coming. I always try to remain as objective as I can when discussing philosophy and ethics, of course, but none of us is perfect, and I'm sure that some of the decisions I've made in the first few seasons were at least partially made because the outcome was known. When you know what's going to happen, it makes it a little easier to say one choice is more ethical than another because ethics depends at least partially on the outcome of a decision. With that out of the way, Clementine pushes the man backward, causing him to fall through the window behind him where zombies grab hold and pull him out. With the man out of the way, they manage to fill the bags that they have full of food before leaving and making their way back to the school. Everyone is happy to see the haul they managed to bring back, but Brody gets really upset when she finds out that they had to leave the safe zone to get it. But leaving the safe zone is only part of the problem, as she winds up freaking out even more when she hears about the man they'd run into. While this panic doesn't make immediate sense, we find out more when Clem and AJ are awoken in the middle of the night by shouting from somewhere in the building. Telling AJ to stay put, Clem goes to investigate, eventually finding Brody and Marlon in the basement fighting about something. Brody is saying something about another group being back and saying that they need to confess something to the group before they spot Clementine. Marlon wants Clem to just leave, but the secret comes out as Brody tells Clem that 10 sisters, Sophie and Minerva, didn't get killed by zombies. Rather, they were given to another group by Marlon as a way to secure his own safety. Before she can get much more out, however, Marlon hits her with his flashlight and she falls to the ground. Just before she dies, she manages to tell Clem that Marlon was planning to trade her and AJ to the Raiders if they show up again. As Brody's taking her last breath, Marlon sprints to the cellar door, locking Clem inside as he apologizes for leaving her with the soon-to-be zombie and saying that he can't let her tell the others. But it's going to take a lot more than a single zombie in a cellar door to take Clementine out. And she manages to take the reanimated Brody out and escape into the courtyard to find AJ pointing his gun at Marlon and demanding to know where Clem is. As he's telling them all that Clem murdered Brody, Clementine calls him out and we get a tense conversation where he eventually admits to essentially selling the twins to secure his own safety. And once again, there's a couple of things to unpack here. For one, if Brody considers himself a leader, then there is no way he should have made any kind of trade like that. Real leaders put themselves in harm's way to protect others, not the other way around. Of course, he is just a kid at the end of the day, and can't be expected to make the same decisions that a seasoned leader would make. And we're forced to take his actions under consideration as we have to decide what to do with him. We have the option to send him away, keep him as a prisoner, or allow him to remain in the community as a member, but not a leader. Given the circumstances, and the fact that everyone knows what he did, the ethical thing to do here is to let him remain, but not as a leader. He made a stupid choice that he thought was the best thing for himself and the community. He had good intentions, and even killing Brody was a crime of passion in a fit of rage rather than a malicious act. He showed immediate remorse, but also showed that he is incapable of making good choices when he needs to. But the decision is moot because as Clementine makes up her mind, a gunshot rings out and Marlon falls to the ground to reveal AJ standing behind him, pointing his revolver. And I find this ending to the episode to be infuriating in a way, because AJ references the advice Clementine gave him about shooting at the very start of the episode.
I didn't hesitate.
It's so very frustrating because it feels like the choices matter line is being thrown in our faces in the moment. Like, yeah, your choices matter, but they don't matter in the way you think they do. Here I am, trying to make the best decisions I can to minimize suffering and follow humanist principles. And Telltale is just tossing everything out and using a single piece of advice I gave this kid I've spent all of an hour raising to destroy any hope I'd had of making a positive impact. And the worst part is, even without seeing the other possible endings, I can easily see AJ using the other optional pieces of advice in a line after the shooting. What? I aimed for the head? What? I saved the last bullet for myself. After everything from Season 3, I started the season with a lower bar, and I'm still disappointed after the first episode. There's 3 more to go, and while I have a general idea of what I might see, I'm also not keeping my hopes up. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're returning to Season 4 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead, covering Episode 2. In case you missed any of the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 2 of Season 4 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead is titled Suffer the Children, and we pick up just a few hours after the end of Episode 1, with Clementine and AJ hanging out in their room. Clem somehow managed to fall asleep after everything that happened, and as she wakes, AJ offers her a cup of coffee. We get some insight into the immediate fallout of the situation with AJ and Marlon, with a few flashbacks mixed with a discussion about whether AJ is a murderer. And it's important here to really focus on a couple of points. For one thing, AJ is, by definition, a murderer, and he needs to understand that fact. He shot a person that was no longer a threat, and that is not okay. As we've discussed in previous episodes, there needs to be lines, and we need to call out when those lines are crossed. But there needs to be some context added to the situation, because AJ isn't some adult who did something with malicious intent. He's a boy, no older than about 8, who has spent his whole life in a world occupied by zombies and people who want to hurt him. The only real role model he's had for most of his life is Clem, who hasn't exactly had the best upbringing herself, given all that's happened. He was wrong for shooting Marlon, but he did it because he thought that it was the right thing to do in the circumstance. He was trying to protect Clementine and the rest of the group in the best way possible. At this point, the best thing to do is to explain to him why his actions were wrong and use the example as a teachable moment. But even that is difficult, because he thinks he's a bad person and that Marlon was a monster. And that's the problem with simplifying morality down to black and white, good and evil. People aren't good or bad. Actions have positive or negative consequences based on a desired outcome. When we start labeling people, we break them down and only see them based on the most extreme things they've done. We lose our humanity, and we risk alienating people who don't deserve it. AJ thinks he's bad because he's young, and he hasn't had a lot of experience with other people. And once someone has made up their mind about how others see them, when they believe the world thinks they are bad, they wind up in a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts, because why should they try to be good when that's just not who they are? Might as well prove everyone right. But we don't want that for AJ. And I like that they gave us the ability to teach AJ that, and discuss the topic with a little more nuance than Telltale usually allows. They even bring up what happened with Lee, though they get it wrong by saying Lee was handcuffed when he absolutely was not in this particular playthrough. And they allow us to make the distinction between murder and a mercy killing. Overall, the scene is a really powerful example of the potential this game has when it's at its best. After a while, 10 comes in and lets Clem and AJ know they are welcome to attend the funeral for Marlon and Brody. And the scene at the funeral is frustrating, but also understandable. The group is divided about what AJ did to Marlon, despite knowing what Marlon had done to 10's sisters and Brody. And some of the anger they show boils down to shock. In a matter of about 12 hours, they've learned the person they trusted as a leader had betrayed them, even murdering one of them and lying about it, before watching him surrender and come clean only to be shot by one of the newest members of the community. The emotions that they would be feeling would range from shock to horror to grief and bewilderment. And in how young they all are, it's a miracle the community didn't collapse with all the weight coming down on them. One of the kids, Mitch, says he wants Clem and AJ kicked out, and I can't even really blame him. We've seen a similar situation, except on the other side of things, when Lee had to decide what to do with Lily in Season 1. But Mitch is smart about it, and suggests a vote be taken on whether they should be allowed to stay or not. Now, Clem could argue against the vote, but we have to ask why that would be a good idea. If most of the group is angry with her and AJ, not wanting them around and being afraid of AJ, why should either of them want to stay? The tension would be unbearable at times, and trusting anyone would be impossible. Let's say either of them were on watch or patrol with another member and something happened, with Clem, AJ, or someone else being injured or killed. There would be questions about intent, wondering if the survivor did everything they could to save the other. It's not like they've been in the community more than a few days either. They just arrived after spending an unknown amount of time on the road, and it wouldn't really be too tough for them just to go back to wandering. Yeah, it would suck to not have walls, a roof, steady food, and comfy beds, but those aren't things they're used to anyway. And the vote goes about how you'd expect, with the group choosing to kick Clem and AJ out. Violet and Lewis escort them to the edge of the safe zone, and after a short goodbye, the two are once again on their own. But that only lasts a short while, as a gunshot rings out, driving them to hide behind some trees. And it turns out the shot came from none other than Abel, the man from the train station. And I'm just going to take a second to point out the absurdity of this situation. The only reason he is alive is thanks to plot armor. He was pulled out of the window, just like Doug from Season 1, into the hungry arms of several zombies. There's no way on Earth that he fought his way out of that with only a bite on one of his arms, an arm that is now missing. It's these little details that really frustrate me with this series and with the writers. Don't tell me that my choices matter, but then kill off characters I saved and bring back those I shoved into a herd of zombies. Clem gets the upper hand on him until someone puts a gun to the back of her head. The pair of raiders wind up taking her down before AJ tries to help, getting himself taken down as well, and before long we find out that the person helping Abel is someone we assumed dead as well, Lily. To be honest, it wouldn't really matter who it was at this point, because of how they're treating Clem and AJ. These are kids, with AJ being especially young, and they are hitting them and stepping on them and just treating them like general trash, and that is not acceptable. But, being that it is Lily, the smart thing to do is to play into whatever advantage that can give us. And it does help some as she reaches a hand out to help Clementine up before the two exchange some memories, and Lily pushes Clem to help them convince the kids from the school to go with them. But you don't really get the choice of going along with Lily, as Clem spots Lewis and Violet sneaking up, having returned when they heard the gunfire and shouting, and the only options you have are to tell them to run or tell Violet to shoot. And that's kind of a shame, because I think it would have been a whole lot more interesting if you had the chance to side with Lily here. Not that siding with her would have really been the ethically right thing to do, but it would have made for a more interesting choice that I don't think many people would have gone with. If it were me, I would have written the choice to be between helping Lily convince the kids to go, or running away and helping the kids at the school fight off intruders. It could even be framed as a way to get back at the kids for kicking you out, and maybe involve Clem being elevated in the new community alongside the person of her choosing. But as it is, the best choice for Clem to make is to tell Violet and Lewis to run. Yelling for Violet to shoot at Lily would be extremely risky, with the chance of her missing and having one of them being shot in return being too high. In the process of yelling for Violet and escaping from Lily and Abel, AJ is shot in the side and is barely able to run far enough to get away. To make things worse, a herd of zombies pops out of nowhere, and Clem has to deal with several of them before even thinking about getting somewhere safe. But as it turns out, there's more to the zombies than meets the eye, as one of them grabs Clementine's hand, telling her to quiet down before leading the remaining zombies away. When the coast is clear, he asks her to follow him and winds up helping to clear AJ's wound before inviting the pair to sit with him at his campfire. It turns out he's a former member of a group known as the Whisperers, but he left when they started doing things he didn't agree with. His name is James, and he offers food and safety for the night while also expositing about Lily's group, as he apparently has been watching them for a while. She's aligned with the group known as the Delta, and they are at war with another community up north, and things aren't going well. They hunt for and steal children to raise as soldiers and help them to fight, which is why they want the group at the school so bad. As they're talking, a zombie wanders over close to the camp, and the player is given the option to either kill it or distract it by throwing a rock. James sees the zombies as equal to living people in a way, and doesn't want to see them killed if it isn't necessary, and he is the one asking you to distract it. In this instance, distracting it is easily the right thing to do. For one thing, killing it would just antagonize James in a way that he doesn't deserve, having been the one to save Clem and AJ with the zombie herd. For another, it really isn't posing an immediate threat outside of just existing nearby, and throwing a rock to lead it away from you means that you don't have to risk being bitten or scratched by taking it down. That's one thing that always bothered me in the series, and in the Walking Dead world in general. Sometimes you have to take the zombies out to get somewhere or save someone, but there are so many times that just creating noise in an area to distract them would work even better. Why waste energy and ammo, not to mention risking injury or death, if you don't have to? Work smarter, not harder. The next morning, James escorts Clem and AJ back to the school, where Lewis and the others agree to help with AJ's wound. To be honest, there's a lot that happens once Clem returns, but there are only a couple of things to really focus on. Clem and the group agree to work together to stand against the threat of the raiders, with Clem working with Ruby and Mitch to clear the greenhouse and secure things for the defense of the school. While the trip to the greenhouse doesn't provide a lot to talk about, there are a couple of decisions worth noting. The first is whether to have Clem go into the greenhouse first or help Ruby up and have her do it. The obvious choice here is to volunteer Clem to go. She's more experienced and can handle things a lot better than Ruby. Plus, the decision has the added effect of catching Mitch off guard, and that makes whatever we might have to deal with worth it. The second decision to call out is whether or not to kill and bury the former school nurse, Miss Martin. Ruby wants to give her a proper burial, but Mitch dismisses the idea as a waste of time. In reality, the best choice to make here is to bury her for Ruby's sake. There's really no downside to helping, and like the situation earlier with James and the zombie, Ruby has earned our appreciation by helping AJ. Once all the supplies are gathered, we have a time skip where Clem and everyone else presumably set up their defenses, before Clem has a nightmare and wakes up to find AJ standing watch on the room. From the conversation, we can surmise the pair have each been dealing with some unspoken trauma, with Clem dealing with some unknown situation at the ranch she recovered AJ from, and AJ dealing with PTSD from being shot by Abel. And this is another teachable moment for AJ, as Clem can make it clear that he needs to recognize when he needs help and not be afraid to ask for it. It's a lesson that I think a lot of people would benefit from, and one that I had to learn myself at one point after returning from Iraq. When you've gone through trauma of any sort, it's normal to want to shut down and keep it inside, but the best way to heal is to open up and talk to people that you trust. For Clem and AJ, they need to be able to open up to each other and share how they're feeling, as they've really only got each other for now. After spending some more time preparing, with Clem checking on everyone and helping the group where it needs it, we are treated to one of those nice, peaceful moments where the group gets to hang out and just be kids for a bit. They decide to play a game of truth or dare, using cards to decide who is asking the questions and who is answering. The game itself is pretty mundane, and a great moment to just take a breath and get to know more about the characters. But there's one response that I want to really hone in on. A sim asks 10 to tell them all something he hadn't told anyone for fear of being made fun of, and he talks about how he thinks there will be a time without zombies. He details an idea about how the world goes through phases, and how this time that they are living in is just another one of those ages that will end at some point, with something new becoming their reality. And it's that moment that really solidified 10 as one of my favorite characters of the season. He's very thoughtful, and seems to see the world in a way that few people are able to. And his thought about a better world without zombies strikes AJ in a different way than it hits everyone else, as AJ realizes that he's the only one there who has no memory of a time before the zombies. But how realistic is 10's dream of a world without zombies, and how many other kids like AJ are out there? It's a question of sustainability for the human race in general. In the modern world, the birth rate and death rate are usually pretty close together, with fluctuations causing populations to rise or fall. But for the most part, the number of births globally outpaces deaths enough that the global population has gone from around 1 billion people in 1800 to over 8 billion people on the planet today. But if the zombie apocalypse happened, the death rate would far outpace the birth rate for decades at the very least. We'd be going backward not only in population, but in medical advancements too, meaning that any babies that were born would be at a high risk to the life of both the infant and the mother. Going back to 1800 in the United States, about 46% of children born didn't make it to see their 5th birthday. The causes of death ranged from injury to illness to neglect, And if you add in the risk of zombies and raiders, that number would probably rise substantially. And for all intents and purposes, the world would be going back to at least 1800 technologically, with very few settlements having the knowledge and equipment to deal with serious medical issues or to even properly feed their population in the long term. Some communities might be able to make things work for a while, but without a big enough population and high enough birth rate, those communities won't last. And that's all without even touching on the idea of minimum viable population. The idea that a population of individuals needs to be big enough to not only allow for genetic diversity, but also to sustain through events like natural disasters, plagues, food shortages, attacks from other groups, and other unforeseen problems that might arise. Just looking at the world we've seen in the game, through 3 seasons and being at least fleetingly introduced to communities like Wellington, House Hardware, Richmond, as well as the smaller places like Prescott, we notice we've only seen a single birth in the game world. There hasn't even been any sign of a baby other than AJ being born after the outbreak. Expanding to the wider universe of The Walking Dead, we see a few more, but it's nowhere near enough to sustain a population. And that ultimately makes Ten's dream of a zombie-free world, at least one with humans still living in it, doomed to be nothing more than a dream in the long run. If people are dying faster than they're being born, it's only a matter of time before the last human takes their last breath. After the game ends, Clementine and Violet go up to check on the walls, looking over everything from an old clock tower and spending some time getting to know each other before Clem has to take her shift on guard duty. And it's during this shift that the raiders finally decide to attack. The battle itself is fine from a game standpoint, but there are a couple of points to mention. The first has to do with Lily and her group coming in and how the first few minutes play out. It isn't really a knock on the writers directly, but it is something that has always bothered me when it comes to storytelling. Clementine rises up with her bow and tells Lily that she's going to shoot her if she moves, and Abel replies,
"You won't get the chance!"
Now, I get why it plays out this way, because if they shot Clem at that moment, the game would end. But this isn't realistic in any way. Abel and Lily have already seen what Clem is capable of, and with the guns they have and the sniper we see behind Lily, Clem would be dead the minute she popped up, because no one would want to give her the chance to fire the bow at Lily. It's one of those things that just really irks me, because there are so many ways that these kinds of situations can play out that are more consistent with how people behave, and it just drives me nuts when characters don't act in ways that make sense. Maybe Lily didn't want Clementine killed, but I don't think anyone except her and Abel knew what Clem looked like, and that sniper would have seen movement and the bow and likely fired before Clem knew what hit her if this were a real situation. Besides that, the kids have the upper hand for most of the battle after they blow up one of the carts Lily brought and use the traps to take out several of the raiders. Clementine winds up in a one-on-one matchup with Abel, holding her own before falling from a second-story balcony with him, landing on top of him and giving him a broken leg, among other injuries. But the battle isn't quite over, as Clem looks up to see Lily standing over her, pointing a gun in her face. She could easily end everything then and there, but she can't seem to find it in herself to pull the trigger, and that hesitation allows Lewis to take her down. And now, in typical Telltale fashion, we have a major choice to make that includes picking one person or another. Lily was freed from Lewis with the help of one of her soldiers, and he is being dragged off in one direction, while Violet is being dragged off in the other. Clementine only has time to help one, apparently, and you have to decide which to save. Honestly, these kinds of choices have really overstayed their welcome in this game, and I wish they had done literally anything else here. Maybe Lewis could have been killed on the spot because Lily didn't like Clem going against her. Or maybe we could have been presented with a choice to surrender or let someone die. Anything would have been better than choose who to save. But we have what we have, and while there isn't really an ethical dilemma here, I chose to save Violet simply because I like the vibe her and Clem have going, and I wanted to see that play out more than I wanted to see more of Lewis's humor. That's not a knock on Lewis, by the way. I really like him as a character at times. but I had to pick someone because that's the mechanic we were given. And after capturing the person that you don't save and throwing a couple more kids in the wagon, Lily decides to cut her losses and leave with the remaining raiders as Clem is left to sort out the mess of zombies and fires now overtaking the school. Asim, Omar, and Lewis were kidnapped, and Mitch was killed in the fight, leaving the group battered but mostly still intact. The one problem they have is that they don't know where Lily and her group took the others. Or that would be a problem if it weren't for the fact that one of the raiders was left behind, Abel. And that's where the episode ends. And I've got to say that so far I'm finding the season a little underwhelming at times, even with the flashes of great moments. This episode in particular just felt like it dragged on, and I think that's mostly due to the poor pacing. If they would have cut out a lot of the planning and preparing for the attack, or stuck with that and cut out some of the slower moments, it would have worked a lot better. This season was only 4 episodes, and it really feels like they could have made it into 5, with one being dedicated to building up the defenses, while another was more about the characters and building them up. Like I said, it's really a pacing problem here, more than a writing issue, and I think a lot of it really boils down to the state of affairs at Telltale Games as the season was being written, with the studio on the verge of closing and having to rush the project out. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're returning to Season 4 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead, this time covering Episode 3. In case you missed any of the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 3 of Season 4 of Telltale's The Walking Dead is titled Broken Toys, and we find ourselves joining the group, or what's left of it, a few hours after Lily and her group left. The fires have been put out, but there's still some cleanup to be done, and Mitch needs to be buried. But all of that comes secondary to finding out where Lily took Lewis, Asim, and Omar. To help with that, Abel has been tied up and stored in the basement for interrogation, and Violet lets Clem know that he's waiting down there with AJ. My first thought was, really? You left him with AJ? The kid that wants revenge for Abel putting shrapnel on his side? But once that cleared, I wondered what would be needed to get the information out. Ethically, harming him in any way to get information is walking a fine line. There is, of course, the concept of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, brought to us by Spock. But this concept is really just a simplification of a subject known as utilitarianism, where the moral good is measured based on the overall impact an action has on the broader group as opposed to the individual. Utilitarianism could easily be used to justify harming Abel if that action gains information that saves the group and prevents future harm. And the concept can really be applied pretty widely in this episode as a whole, as we'll see some pretty questionable things later on. But for now, we can focus on Abel and getting the location of Lily's local base out of him. The interrogation on its own would likely be completely useless though, as Abel isn't really afraid of being hurt and he seems to almost enjoy it. The real breakthrough comes when he realizes his internal injuries from falling at the end of the last episode are going to kill him. He confesses he doesn't want to become a zombie, saying that he doesn't want his body to be in control of his mind, and he offers to give you the location if you promise to end him and make sure he doesn't turn. And that is a promise that's easy to make and keep. He gets what he wants, and we get what we want. He could lie about the location, sure, but he could do that either way, and by the time that we would scout out and return, he would likely be dead from his injuries, so it makes sense to make the concession. And it turns out Abel was telling the truth, as we scout out after dealing with him and find a big riverboat crawling with raiders. We even see Lewis being pulled along one of the decks, confirming the kids are there. Once we've scouted the area and come up with a plan for attack, we find ourselves going back to see James to ask for his help with the rescue mission. Before we can talk to him about it though, we're forced to make a couple of choices, as he asks for our help in recovering his mask. His camp was messed up by the raiders, and he wasn't able to grab it before the zombies overran him. driving him away and leaving him vulnerable. He asks Clem to help get it back, but he also asks her to not kill any of the zombies. Now, for a moment, we'll set aside the fact that he could just toss a rock and draw them away. You know, the thing he taught us to do in the last episode. And we'll instead focus on James's philosophy, because I think it's worth talking about. After what he saw when he was with the Whisperers, and because of his own actions that he discusses with us later in the episode, he has become a staunch pacifist. Now, generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with trying to minimize violence, and that would even be a goal of humanism, as violence typically leads to negative outcomes and detracts from human well-being. That being said, there is such a thing as being too pacifistic, and James kind of straddles that line as he strives to not kill anyone or anything unless it is absolutely necessary for survival. He also admits, after we help him and ask for his help, that he sees zombies as another form of human. This confession comes after he shows us a barn full of zombies he's been saving, and it opens a completely new can of worms. Practically speaking, even if we don't agree with him, going along with whatever he says is the smart move as we need his help. But his ideas merit a closer look. Very basically, he thinks that when someone dies and reanimates, a part of who they were before remains active. This is something that can't really be proven, but it also can't really be dismissed outright, as there is a possibility that the part of the brain responsible for conscious thought would come back as well, allowing the person to sort of go along for the ride as they eat and kill. I did cover consciousness in another video recently, so I'll link that here in case you're interested. But suffice to say, we don't really know what makes you, you. And we can't rule out that part being active in some way when someone reanimates. And that kind of makes things worse for those who turn in a way. Imagine having to watch as you do horrible things while having no control over your actions. On the other hand, the conscious brain could be in a dream state rather than a watchful one, meaning the person would have no idea that they were dead or that they were eating other people. They could be sitting on a beach somewhere in their mind as they chomp down on Jimmy from accounting. But does that make it wrong to kill them? Should we be prioritizing distracting zombies instead of taking them out? There's no easy answer here, and it's really up to the individual how they want to handle things. Personally, I would almost view them as a new species of carnivorous animal and make a habit of avoiding them. Defenses can be built to keep them out of communities, and unless there's a direct threat to a living person, there isn't really much reason to take them out. As far as James' general pacifism, while it is noble to want peace, it's also important to realize that there are some people out there that just won't let that happen. For one reason or another, there are people who want nothing more than to cause chaos and destruction, and being a pacifist won't increase your odds of survival when you run into them. At the end of the day, you have to be willing to live with yourself, and you have to ask yourself what actions cross a line for you. Getting back into the story, we follow Clem and AJ back into the school after convincing James to help us, and we find Ruby planning a party. She wants to enjoy the last night before they go after the Raiders, and she asks you to help her plan it when you get a chance. The party itself, from a story perspective, is really about giving us some more backstory on the characters and making the place feel more like a home for Clem and AJ. But it's also one of those moments that really sets a high bar for what the series could be. We get the chance to interact with everyone and pick things like the candle color, music, and banner decorations. And we learn why the kids we are starting to see as a family wound up in Ericson's boarding school in the first place. For all the criticism I give this game, with the flaws in the writing and sometimes unbelievable actions the characters take, this scene is one of those that I can really admit pulled me in. I was even laughing along with them and was really moved by the song Violet was singing. Then AJ blows out a candle, and Telltale produces one of the most emotional scenes in the entire series by putting Clementine back on the train from Season 1. We're back talking to Lee, but it isn't like the flashback from Season 2. This is an obvious dream, with Clementine even being aware of the fact that Lee is the Lee inside her head, acting as a conscience and helping her sort through difficult emotions. We even see Clem change mid-scene from the little girl that Lee knew into who she is in the present, with him commenting on how she's grown. But the dream can only last so long before Clem is awoken by AJ, as the time to attack the raiders has arrived. As we're preparing for battle, Clem and James have a brief sidebar where James reveals a bit more of his past, using the story as a lesson to highlight what he thinks AJ might become if the boy isn't taught that killing shouldn't be easy. And that's a lesson I think is often lost in The Walking Dead, as we see zombies being taken down with no thought and people being caught up in things like revenge. There have been so many instances in this series where being more violent than necessary was an option, and there have even been times where people have commented how they felt good watching Carver being taken out by Kenny, or saying that killing another character like Ben was good because of what his actions had caused. One of the biggest flaws in humanity is the idea of retribution, and that punishment is somehow always right when someone makes a mistake. Those concepts make it easy to justify causing harm and bring down humanity as a whole. It might feel good in the moment when the supposed bad guy gets their comeuppance, but in reality it should never be something we take pleasure in. If killing or causing harm becomes easy, we've lost our humanity and any hope of actually building a better future for those who come after. With some help from James's zombie friends and a little luck, Clem, Violet, and AJ reach the boat, planting a bomb in the boiler room and locating their captive friends before things go sideways. Minerva is guarding Lewis, Asim, and Omar, and with a little convincing, she opens the door to Lewis's cell. But the whole thing turns out to be a trap, as she knocks Clem out and locks the other two in another cell. There's a back and forth with Lily that follows, as the woman tries to convince Clementine that their community is actually good, despite the propensity to steal children. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, the idea of utilitarianism is seen here as well, as the idea Lily is spouting follows loosely the idea that the suffering of a few is permissible to benefit the well-being of the many. The Delta is involved in a war with some other community, though the details of how that war started and who all is involved fail to make themselves known. And the solution the Delta came up with to try and give themselves an advantage was to find as many children as they could and indoctrinate them into becoming cannon fodder. At that point, it isn't sacrificing a few to save the many, because the ones being sacrificed weren't involved to begin with. I'll use an example to explain the difference. On one hand, you have a burning building with some people trapped inside. One group of 30 people is locked inside a room, and the other group, consisting of 5 people, are trapped behind some fallen debris. Moving the debris would allow you to free the 5 people, but it would also bury the key to the door that the 30 people are trapped behind. You only have enough time to either move the debris or grab the key and open the door, but not enough time to do both. Utilitarianism would mean grabbing the key and saving the 30 at the expense of the 5. On the other hand, with what Delta is doing, you have the same burning building, but there are only 30 people inside and they are trapped behind a wall of fire. Delta is grabbing random people off the street and pushing them into the building, hoping that enough bodies will stamp out the fire and allow the 30 to go free. There's no circumstance in which you can justify the actions of Delta in the second illustration. What they are doing is wrong, no matter how much they want it to be right. And all of that is without mentioning that they cut out Lewis's tongue because he wouldn't stop talking, which easily falls under cruel and unusual punishment. To push things even further, Lily gets mad at Violet for speaking up as well, and orders one of her minions to cut one of the girl's hands off as punishment. AJ intervenes before she can do it though, biting off the ear of the woman and apparently earning Lily's admiration as she sees a potential in AJ as a good fighter. Lily takes AJ away, and Clem and the others manage to escape not long after, with Clem going to find Lily as the rest leave the boat before it explodes. And she does manage to locate AJ, as Lily is explaining to him how weak his group is, and within a matter of moments all hell breaks loose as Ten shows up, stealing one of the guard's guns and pointing it at Lily in an attempt to free his friends. but 10 isn't willing to shoot Lily, and she gains the upper hand for a moment before AJ bites her hand and Clem steps in to assist. After a brief struggle, AJ winds up pointing a gun at Lily as she tries to surrender, and we have the choice to either tell AJ to stand down or let him shoot her. She's obviously lying about surrendering to try to save her own ass, but the right thing to do is to convince AJ to lower the gun. She's been beaten, and we need to teach AJ when killing is warranted and when it isn't. In a normal circumstance, we would keep situational awareness and make sure she doesn't have the chance to regain the upper hand. But because this is a Telltale game, James puts his back to Lily in order to get the gun from AJ, and Clem apparently closes her eyes and misses Lily picking back up the knife. In a matter of a second, she stabs James in the back and gets the gun. Before she can act, though, the bomb in the boiler goes off and the episode ends. All in all, I would say this episode might be one of my favorites of the series, and it's definitely the best of the season so far. There was a good mix of action and downtime, with some great character moments, and even the end wasn't as bad as some of the other episodes we've played. There is one episode left in the series, and I'm looking forward to seeing how Telltale sends off Clementine and AJ. Will they get the happy ending they deserve, or will things end on a sour note? Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're finishing off Season 4 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead. In case you missed any of the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 4 of the final season of Telltale Games The Walking Dead is titled Take Us Back, and after a brief recap of the events that got us here from AJ, we pick right up where we left off in Episode 3, with Clementine laying on the railing of a sinking ship as she tries to snap back to reality after being knocked down in an explosion. After losing her hat, she locates AJ and fights to get to his location, saving him at the last possible second and working together with him to get off the ship and back onto the dock. They have to fight off one of Lily's men before finding Lily herself escaping on a raft. The easy thing to do here would be to just shoot her with an arrow and be done. But by now, you all know that we don't do things just because they're easy. Lily probably deserves to die for all that she's done, and she could easily be considered a threat in the future if she isn't put down. But that doesn't necessarily mean that shooting her would be the right choice here. Through the conversations we've had with her, as well as the experience we have from Season 1, we know that she's been through a lot, and her trauma drives her in ways that we don't even fully understand. We also know that her intention, no matter how misguided, was to keep the people of the Delta safe. We don't know what kind of community the Delta is, though, outside of some references to food and shelter that they keep promising the kids if they come along quietly. Yes, they're searching for soldiers and going about getting them entirely wrong, but that on the surface doesn't tell us much. What have they been through to bring them to the point of stealing children to make them into soldiers? Was that always the plan, or was there some desperation that drove them to commit atrocities? There may be no justification that would make the things that they've done okay, but knowing the motivation and history would help a lot when making a decision on what to do with Lily. And that's the difference between empathizing with someone and justifying their actions. You can understand them and why they made a choice, no matter how heinous that choice is, without agreeing with it. Empathy drives mercy, while justification drives collusion. We also need to consider what Lily appears to be going for as a resolution. She openly doesn't want to die, but I think that is more of an involuntary defensive mechanism than anything else. And here, we're kind of leaving the realm of the knowable for a second and stepping into speculation. I think that a part of Lily wants to die, wants the pain of the world to end. But at the same time, another part of her refuses to give up. It's the same side of her we saw come out when Larry died, after she'd admitted to Lee that Larry was all she had in the world, and she didn't know what she'd do without him. The part that wants to die is reckless and willing to do drastic things. hoping that she'll come up against something that she won't be able to fight off. The part that wants to live pushes her through those impossible situations and keeps her going even when all hope seems lost. Meeting back up with Clementine brings back a flood of old memories and brings the inner conflict front and center, making it impossible to do something as simple as shoot Clem from a couple of feet away or finish her off when she has the upper hand. And that inner conflict really comes to a head after the boat is destroyed and the reality of being alone once again hits her. She flees on the raft because it is the practical thing to do, the thing the survivor side insists on. But she eggs on Clementine as the other side begs for a mercy kill. Clementine, being the one to do it, would also bring things full circle, with the little girl turned survivor getting revenge for Carly or Doug, while also eliminating the biggest threat the Ericson kids face. But she isn't really a threat anymore. The kids can deal with her, and they know it now. She also knows that trying to come back for them wouldn't be worth the effort it would take, if she's even allowed back into the Delta after losing so many people and a boat. It's likely, if things there are as rough as she says they are, that she won't be welcomed back and she'll be stuck wandering alone once again. And that is an even worse fate than death for her, as she tells Clem that the Delta was the first home she'd found in years. Not shooting her keeps the blood off Clem's hands in the same way that we kept it off of AJ's hands by telling him to lower the gun at the end of the last episode. It also shows some consistency when it comes to how we should be teaching AJ by refusing to shoot at someone who isn't an active threat. As Lily drifts away into the night, the boat finally collapses next to the dock as Clem and AJ escape the area. There's some zombies to deal with, as well as a couple of raiders, but the group reunites and most of them are able to escape using one of the raiders' carts. The one other thing of note here is that Minerva shows back up, getting bitten and shot for a second time with an arrow from Clem. But really there isn't much more to talk about, as Clem, AJ, and Ten wind up fleeing the beach together and making their way into a cave system. We get a glimpse in the cave of who AJ is becoming as he loses his temper a bit and recounts the things that Clem has told him and done over the season. And this is where we have a big decision to make. Should we support AJ in his desire to have more freedom in the choices he makes, or are we afraid that we've created a monster that can't be trusted? To be honest, based on some of the writing I've seen from Telltale at times, this is one of those decisions I absolutely hate to have to make. I feel like I've done a decent job with teaching AJ, though I've not been perfect and I'm not sure if the lessons landed in the way that I think they did. Besides that, AJ is still really young, and it's not fair that he should have to grow up as fast as he's had to. Now, that can't really be helped given the state of the world, but I can speak from experience here as a parent who's recently had a kid graduate high school and go out into the world on their own. Even after a little over 18 years of trying to teach and instill good values, it's terrifying to think that this little baby that once fit in the palm of my hand is now flying solo. It's not like AJ would be going off to college or leaving home to join the military or some other career, but the thought of him making what would be normally a very mature decision, like who should live and die, is scary. In the end, I chose to give him some freedom and hope that it wouldn't be the wrong choice. Like I said, with Telltale's writing, that could mean anything. Hitting that button could cause AJ to turn and shoot 10 for all I know, justifying it by saying the boy shouldn't have gotten Mitch killed or something. Thankfully, that doesn't happen, and AJ seems relieved and a bit surprised to see Clem show confidence in him. With that out of the way, the group makes their way out of the cave, discovering Violet on the other side. She'd left the others, intent on finding Clem and making sure that she was safe. I want to say here that they then made their way back safely to the school and everyone lived happily ever after. But it couldn't be that simple. For a while, they walk peacefully through the woods, talking about how life will be moving forward and even coming up with a new name to use for the school in the future. The whole time, my heart was racing more than it ever did during the action scenes, because I've seen enough Walking Dead between the game and the show to know that when people are happy, something bad usually happens. Occasionally, someone gets shot from behind as we're looking at them, but sometimes there's an unexpected explosion or a surprise zombie. That kind of feeling might be normal when you're watching or playing a season finale, where you know there's going to be another season to deal with whatever might happen. It even makes sense from a writing perspective, because you want people to have a reason to come back and watch the next season. But a series finale should be different. The expectation when you're watching or playing the finale of something is that all the threads will be wound up and the remaining characters will be in a better place than when they started. It's what makes stories interesting and fun, because we know at the end of the day, no matter what our favorite characters are going through, things will work themselves out and be alright. But this is Telltale and The Walking Dead. Clem, Violet, AJ, and Ten come across an old bridge that looks like it's seen much better days. My first thought was, that thing is going to collapse. But I was so wrong. As they're close to the other side of it, with only a small gap to jump before reaching the other side, Minerva comes out of nowhere to ruin the day. She's been bitten twice, shot with at least 2 arrows, and she's trailing a herd of zombies behind her. As Clem holds off what I can only assume is some kind of superhuman and her zombie cohorts, Violet helps AJ cross the gap. Very briefly, the next few moments see Violet save Clem, Ten fight to get to his sister, and Clementine split her leg wide open on an axe. Even as zombies are attacking Minerva, the girl just refuses to die. Clem somehow manages to get across the gap, and we watch AJ as he makes his first tough call, choosing to shoot Ten and save Violet, as the boy was refusing to leave his sister and Violet was refusing to leave him. Violet isn't happy with AJ when she finally makes it across, but he actually made a good call. Maybe giving him some freedom wasn't such a bad idea. But we're not done yet, as the trio still has to make their way back to the school through a surprise herd of zombies. For some reason, there are thousands of dead on the side of the river Clem and the group jumped to. It doesn't really make a ton of sense because there is no way that they were crossing the bridge or river without falling into the water and being swept away. But in typical Walking Dead fashion, zombies multiply when you least expect it. Violet jumps a fence, becoming separated from Clem and AJ, and Clem tells her to just head back and meet them at the school before her and AJ head for some rocks, attempting to outclimb the zombies. And this is the point in the game where I very nearly stopped playing altogether. As Clem and AJ are escaping the herd, one of the zombies grabs Clem's leg and bites her. A million thoughts ran through my head over the next few minutes, as I fought to get the pair safely to James's Walker barn from the last episode. But the primary one was that just maybe they would be able to save her if they removed her leg fast enough. Then they got to the barn, securing it just well enough that the massive herd outside was held at bay, and Clem started becoming very pale and weak. She was starting to look and sound a lot like Lee from Season 1, and I was not having any of it. The game was forcing me to act as both AJ and Clem, and all I wanted to do was shut the whole thing down and refuse to even make this video. To me, it was all some sick, twisted joke on Telltale's part, building up 4 seasons just to end it all with this horrible, meaningless ending. The expectation was that I would be sad, like when Lee died, that I would see AJ as a new Clem, that I would be as attached to his character as I was to her after everything Lee had done to keep her alive. But sadness wasn't what I was feeling. I was disappointed, angry, frustrated. Clem couldn't die. And I'm sure AJ would have felt the exact same way as he watched her fade away. She asked him to shoot her if she got bit when they were talking at the school back in episode 3. But now, I couldn't bring myself to make him go through with it. Not just because any feelings I had were gone, but because he would need to put an axe in her head, and that just seemed so much worse than having Clem shoot Lee. AJ covered himself in zombie guts and prepared to leave his surrogate mother alone in the barn. But at the very last second, he changed his mind and lifted the axe up in the air, bringing it down in a single swing and causing everything to go black. But there was still more to play through, as I led Clementine into a burning fortress to find AJ. This was the scene they'd referenced a couple of times, the bad thing that happened at McCarroll Ranch. I thought that it was maybe a kind of purgatory, that Clem was reliving the memory one more time in the afterlife. But then I found myself playing again as AJ, and asking when the episode would finally end. What more hell could Telltale put me through? Gathering some fish and rescuing Clementine's hat from the river as it floated by, I made my way back to the school. I just wanted to reach the credits, more out of spite than any desire to see what the rest of the group was up to in this new Clementine-free world. But as I handed in the fish I'd caught, I heard her voice, and I nearly jumped out of my skin.
What you doing there, goofball?
I thought it was some kind of hallucination at first, but then the camera turned, and there she stood, minus one leg. But that didn't really make me feel a lot better, as the episode wrapped up with a couple of small conversations and one last meal with the family. I've had the occasional problem with the writing in this series and in this season, but none of the problems I've had hold a candle to what I just went through with this ending. Telltale pulled one of the worst fake-out deaths I've ever seen in any piece of media, rivaling the Glenn fake-out death from the show. There was no way she was getting out of that barn. The infection had taken hold, as we've seen it do so many times over the course of the series, and she was moments away from turning. Either none of those people needed to die, or there was something special about Clementine that made her immune, and the effects that we saw were from shock, meaning she didn't even need to lose her leg. Other than that ending, I would say the season overall was actually not too bad. If I had to rate it, I would probably drop it second to the first season, but I don't even know that I could rate the seasons in that way after season 1. Season 1 wasn't perfect, but it was easily my favorite. After that, each season had its ups and downs, and while moments and characters stick out in their own ways, none of the follow-up seasons really hit me as great or awful. But I'll talk more about my opinions on them in a series retrospective at some point. I'll also be covering some other aspects of The Walking Dead in various videos over time, as there are a ton of ethical questions we could deep dive into, and lots of characters still to pick apart in friend or foe. But here we are. After 20 videos and 4+ months, we've come to the end of the road for The Walking Dead in the Philosophy and Ethics series. I'll be covering Michonne at some point, but I think I'm going to make that miniseries something on its own. It'll be similar to this format, but just not on Thursdays, as we're going to be jumping into a new game starting next week. Leave a comment down below and tell me whether you gave AJ the freedom to make choices or not, and what you thought of Clementine's fake-out death. If you want to get your name in the videos, the chance to see some cool behind-the-scenes stuff, and to get early access to new videos, you can join my Patreon or sign up for a channel membership here on YouTube. That's all I've got for now. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.